Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Divers Ready. My name's James and welcome to this, the third in our series of videos focused on gear maintenance. We've partnered with the good people at Dive Rite to make this series of videos focused on gear maintenance, particularly how you as the owner can take care of your equipment to help you protect your investment. We know that dive equipment is not cheap, so when you buy something, you want it to last you a long time, and I'm giving you as many hints and tips in this series of videos as possible to make sure you get the most value for the money that you spend. As with every video in this series, Dive Rite has been kind enough to give away a prize. This week, because we're focused on accessories, we'll be giving away a whole package of dive accessories, including a Dive Rite primary reel, a Dive Rite DSMB, a Dive Rite line cutter, and a handheld underwater light, all from Dive Rite. Stay tuned to the end of this video so you can find out how you can enter. But for now, let's dive in. We're going to go around each of these pieces of equipment and give you my hints and tips for helping them last you a lifetime in diving. Let's start with reels then. There is no reason why a quality reel like this won't last you your diving lifetime, but there are some maintenance considerations. First off, plastic parts, metal parts. For the plastic parts, we've talked about how UV degrades plastic over time. So for long-term storage, you don't want to be leaving your reel in direct sunlight. And then for the metal parts, like for example, the actual chamber here and the clip, and you've got a bunch of screw heads and so on, they need to be freshwater rinsed. But you've also got a lot of line on here, and this line is a nylon polymer for all intents and purposes. And you'll see this is this week's prize or part thereof it. You see how nice and organized that line is on the spool. It's not going to look like that for long unless you take care of it. Every time you deploy and then sort of wind your reel back in, the line's going to get looser and looser. So what you want to do is every now and then feed all the line off of the reel and make sure you're winding it back in and keeping it organized. Another reason for doing that is the nylon is absorbent. It gets wet and it stays wet for a long time. So giving a quick dunk in a rinse tank to get the salt off isn't too effective. What I like to do is to unwind all the line from the reel, let it soak in fresh water, and then wind it back in under tension. This does two things. Number one, it keeps the line organized. So the next time I use the line to send an SMB to the surface, there's less chance of it jamming. In the event that a reel jams, you're trained to let go of it, which means you've lost both the SMB and the reel. I don't want you guys to do that. So keep the line organized for that reason. The second reason is salt management. We want to be careful about where we're tracking salt into our storage areas. Yeah, this line is nylon. Salt isn't going to affect it too much. It may eat away at it over time and with friction, but generally it's going to be totally fine. But what I don't want to be doing is dragging all this line that's acting like an absorbent material with salt water into the area where I'm storing the rest of my dive gear. Another thing to consider when buying a reel is if you go for quality, it will last you a long time. And in the case of the Dive Rite reels, for example, you can buy spare parts for the reel. You can get a replacement clip here in the case that this wears down, which it will over time. If you lose the winding knob, you can replace that. You can replace the slide lock. All these different parts can be rebuilt in the event that you have a minor failure. So it doesn't mean that you need to throw the whole thing away and buy a new reel. These things aren't cheap. I mean, I think this one starts around $100 and goes up from there. You know, you can spend $200-300 on a reel. The other thing is, if you're laying line on a permanent basis, i.e. inside a wreck or inside a cave, remember that the spool is reloadable. You can buy high-vis line and reload it back onto your reel and use the same reel multiple times. So to that end then, I do encourage people to buy the best quality reel that they can afford, and with the careful maintenance and replacement parts every now and then, it should last them a lifetime in diving. So let's talk about cutting tool maintenance then. This is the Dive Rite line cutter. It's part of this week's prize. It's a straightforward little piece of kit. You've just got a stainless steel blade there that's held in place by 2 Phillips screws. You also get a spare blade because that blade is a wear and tear item. It is user changeable. So if you notice it's starting to get blunt, or if you notice that it is starting to rust because you haven't done a good enough job of rinsing it, you can just take those 2 screws out, swap the blade out, and you don't have to throw the whole thing away. The biggest mistake I see people make when rinsing their cutting tool, whether it's a line cutter like this one or a more traditional sort of knife that comes in a hard plastic sheath, is not rinsing the sheath itself inside and out. They just kind of dunk the whole tool in the rinse tank or whatever they're using, and they don't actually take the time to take the cutting tool out, make sure that gets the thorough rinse, make sure this gets a thorough rinse, and that it's left to air dry out of the sheath. And it's not about, you know, a line cutter where a backup razor blade is going to cost you less than $1, or a knife itself, which in this case is actually a titanium blade, so that's not going to rust anyway. It's really about salt management. If you're diving in the ocean, when you rinse your gear, it's not just about getting the salt off of these small little items that are cheap, replaceable, and, you know, sort of easy to maintain. It's also about controlling where you track salt into the areas where you store your dive kit when you're not diving. Salt management. It's really, really important, and people often overlook that. So I always make sure I take my knife out of the sheath, make sure the sheath gets a good wash, make sure that the blade gets a good wash, that they're left to air dry separately before I reassemble them. Same thing with the cutting tool, that's going to get washed. This is going to get a thorough soak so we get all the salt out of the webbing that the little sheath is made out of, and then that gets to air dry separately as well, and then that way I'm controlling where salt ends up in my storage area. All right, we're about halfway through, so I just want to take a quick pause and say thank you again to the sponsor of this and the entire series of gear maintenance videos, Dive Rite. They make equipment for serious divers. I know, I've been using their products for years. If you guys want to help me out, one of the ways you can do it, which is completely free and takes you just 2 seconds, is to support the sponsors on this channel. So down in the description of this video below, I've got links to Dive Rite's social media pages. Head over there, throw them a like, throw them a subscribe, throw them a follow, and that way you're helping us out to keep making these videos. Really appreciate it, guys. Right, let's dive back into it. Next up, let's talk about lights. And if we're going to talk about lights, that means we need to talk about, in general, electronics underwater. And as you guys know, electricity and water do not mix, which means we also need to talk, for the first time in this series of gear maintenance, about O-rings. O-rings are on average 2-cent piece of rubber in a ring shape that is saving the life of your expensive diving electronics, and they're incredibly important to maintain. Number one reason that you throw a light away or it becomes broken is because it floods, and the O-ring is what prevents a light from flooding. So anywhere that you've got a metal housing like this that comes in 2 parts, you're going to have an O-ring that creates the seal between those parts and stops water seeping in. Now let me tell you about how I maintain my lights post-dive. First and foremost, they get a long fresh water soak. So separate bath from all the other gear, my wetsuit, my BCD that's tracking a lot of salt in. I get a plastic tub, I fill it with fresh water, and I use that just for my electronics. So my GoPro goes in there, my underwater lights go in there, my computer goes in there, and they often soak overnight. I want that fresh water to penetrate all the little creases and crevices of the electronics and make sure that it dissolves any salt crystals that are thinking about taking up root in there. Next morning, I take my electronics out and I leave them to air dry on a towel, and then I disassemble them. So I'm going to take the cap off of this light, I'm going to take the O-ring off of there, I'm going to take the battery out to recharge it if it needs that. I'm going to make sure that the battery connectors are clean. I'm going to make sure that the O-ring is first off intact, it hasn't been pinched or twisted or anything like that, and then I'm going to lubricate the O-ring and reassemble the whole unit back to one piece. That's incredibly important. Any diver watching this video should be able to do that basic piece of maintenance. We also need to talk about batteries, which we haven't done so far on this channel. We need to keep batteries out of direct sunlight. We need to make sure that they're fully charged at all times, of course. And if possible, we need to keep spares with us in our Saver Dive kit. A battery, unfortunately, even in this day and age, is still a wear and tear item. So even if it's rechargeable, there's going to come a point in time where it's just not able to hold a charge anymore and you're going to have to replace it out. If your light has a sealed body design, by which I mean you don't have to take it apart to charge it, you just plug it into a charger, you need to make sure that those connection points are completely clean, because you don't want electricity passing through, electrolysis happening, and more salt being generated on those connectors. So what I like to do is take a Q-tip, dip it in a little bit of vinegar, and just make sure that both the male end, normally on the actual charger itself, and the female end on the connectors is completely clean and shiny to prevent that electrolysis from happening. And of course, bulbs can be replaced, but in these days of reliable LED technology, that is a thing that needs to happen less and less. Stay with me, people. I've got an awesome top tip coming up right now for how I store my dive accessories. Real quick guys, this is how I store a lot of my accessories. I have a snout around the back of the supermarket, beg, borrow, steal some milk crates, and then I drill 2 holes in the side, run a line of bungee, and use that as kind of like a clothesline to clip all of my accessories off to. And then my wetsuit can live in here, I can put my fins on each side, all that kind of good stuff. So just keeps things nice and organized, and the advantage of it being a milk crate is obviously lightweight, it's protected when it's on the boat, it's not getting crushed in a gear bag. And then when I step off, if I want to do an initial rinse before I get home and deep clean everything, I can just dunk the whole crate into the rinse tank and it will drain out most of the salt, and then I get home and I give all my gear a really thorough desalination treatment. DSMBs, you guys know I'm crazy for them. This Dive Rite one, which is part of this week's prize, is a beast. It's 5 feet long, it's a handspan width, and it comes in its own sort of fold-away pouch. There are some considerations. You guys know I'm crazy about DSMBs, I always dive with one, but there are things you need to do to make sure you're maintaining them and washing them well. For a start, rinsing a DSMB is not as simple as gathering it up, dunking it into fresh water and calling that rinsed, because you've got to make sure that you're rinsing the inside as well. As the bag ascends to the surface, water will seep into the inside of the bag, and you don't want to leave any salt in there eating away at the threading. So how do we rinse out an SMB on the inside? Very simply, you've got the dump valve here which unscrews. Be careful because it's spring loaded. There we go. You can take the plug out like that, and now you have access to the inside. So you can get a tap or a hose, run the water on the inside there, fill it up with fresh water, leave the fresh water in it for a little while, by all means. Make sure you're running water in through the low pressure inflator coupling here. These are metal attachments. You're going to want to make sure that these are all well rinsed. As you can see, you have a stainless steel spring here which works the actual valve itself. Make sure that gets a good rinse. And then you can empty the fresh water out of it, let it dry, and then reassemble. So you're just going to put the cap back in there, make sure the spring is nicely situated. Probably the #1 reason that I have to throw a DSMB away is because it's faded, because it's been in the sun for too long and it's no longer useful as a surface marker buoy because it's not visible anymore, because it's lost its nice bright day glow color and it's just become faded and matte and nasty. So one of the biggest tips I can give you guys is do your best. I know it's a sunny sport, but do your best to keep your SMB out of direct sunlight so that it holds the color as best it can for as long as it can. So I want to show you this SMB from my box of SMBs. You can see there the seam on it is just about to go, and you can see this kind of pale salmon color it's become. It used to be this color. So that's why you keep it out of direct sunlight. That being said, I've probably had this about 10 years, and I think 10 years ago I might have paid 20 bucks for it. So I've got good value out of it. Here you go, that's going in this week's prize as well. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's about as many hints and tips as I could cram into this video concerning the maintenance of your dive accessories. I want to say thank you again to Dive Rite for sponsoring this entire series of videos. Really appreciate it, guys. It's great to partner up with you. And I want to say thank you to you guys for watching. Greatly appreciate it. If you would like to win this collection of dive accessories from Dive Rite, there is a link to the giveaway in the description of this video below. So you head over there and that'll tell you what you've got to do. Don't forget to support my sponsor Dive Rite by following them on their social channels, all of which are linked below, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. It really helps me out to keep making these videos. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're getting value out of this. Ultimately, guys, my goal is just to make sure that your dive gear, whatever brand it is, lasts you as long as possible and it keeps you in the sport. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, my name's James. This was your Divers Ready gear maintenance video for this week. Dive safe, dive often.